Okay, welcome to our fourth lecture. What I'm going to talk about during this lecture is the conversion that my wife and I did of our place here in Raleigh, and you'll be going, some of you will be going there in another 10 days, couple weeks, 610 Kirby Street. I ran too long on the first lecture. I'm going to have to go really fast on this one, okay? But if you do have a burning question, stop me. Okay, so what I want you to do as we go through this, recall we were talking about the 5 physical systems. That's the foundation of what I want you to take away from the course. And so we're going to look at these as we go through and see what we did at our place. So this is the house that my wife and I bought 16 years ago. It had to be under $100,000. It had to be within walking distance, greater than a mile, less than a mile and a half from NC State, and it had to be south-facing. So this is what it was. It's in a little neighborhood. It was 1,050 square feet, which is why it was under $100,000. It was in this little funky neighborhood surrounded by maximum security prison, a mental institution, and a home for the deaf. And so we said, yeah, why not? So we took it. A few years later, and this is after we had gone on our round, we kind of just hung there for 5 or 6 years, just messing. And then we started to upgrade it. I had put on a roof. The roof was starting to leak, so I went to the extra expense to put on a metal roof because I wanted better water that came off the roof. And in fact, just this past weekend, I redid the gutters. Bill Reed from Warrenton and a gutter company came in, put in the gutters, put in the guards, and I'll show you that system. It's pretty good. In the front yard, because it was south-facing, that was the sunniest part of the garden when we started. So basically what you need for food production is minimum 6 hours. Hopefully if you can get up 9, 10, 12 hours of sun, you need the incoming energy to produce the complex carbohydrates and sugars. So in the front yard, I said, okay, and my son was about 2 at the time, maybe a little bit more. So he's just at that age, he's going to start running around. So I wanted to control that running around, so I built this fence. And it's cedar posts and bamboo. And then I planted apple trees that I got from Lee Calhoun. So they're heritage apples from around the southeast. And I planted them 30 inches on center. And you can see, if you're looking at where these two are coming together, that they're overlapping. And eventually they're going to grow together. So eventually this fence will be freestanding. I can take down the post, take down the bamboo, and it'll produce apples. And it's called a Belgian fence. This was at Blooming. This is some of the production. I had a real good production this year. As I think I told you last week, I don't like any of the apples that grow on this fence. They're too soft and mushy. So I made mushy applesauce this year, and I finally figured out how to go. The other thing, and this is not done, we're beginning, it's the south-facing aspect of the house. So energy is coming in, and one of the things I want to do is I want to put in a solar air heater or a trom wall, T-R-O-M-B-E. And basically, that's just a piece of glazing in front of, it can be masonry or a black background, and you can see as the air, cooler air comes in from low inside the floor, goes through a vent, and as it goes up inside the glazing, it gets heated up by the sun, and it pops back into the room and heats the room. So basically, if I put one of those on, I can probably heat one, maybe a little bit more. Yes?
Is the roof blue for any other reason than aesthetics?
Oh, good question. It's blue because I looked at that cerulean blue and I fell in love. And it was not a good thing because, blue takes in energy. And thankfully, the way it's built, I put furring strips, nailed it right through the asphalt shingles, and then we screwed the metal roof to the furring strips. I just fell in love with the blue, and I'll tell you this, when we did the garage, and you'll see some images of it later, I said, well, that needs to have a blue roof too. In fact, if you're looking for our place and how to get there on Google Maps, look on satellite view, blue roof. Okay, so we did the roof, and my wife says, well, we need to do that white. I said, no, it's blue. You know, so we did it blue, and then tax time came. We went and talked to the tax lady, the woman who does our taxes. Well, can we get a break for this? She said, what color is it? I said, well, it's blue. Well, if it were white, you could get a tax break, because if you have white roofs, you can cut your air conditioning by 20%. Yeah, amazing. You're reflecting that heat. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Good question. Thank you. These are tram systems that I saw at a park in Melbourne, Australia, near where David Holmgren lives, and in fact, the one that's kind of leaning against the house is a temporary one. And in fact, I challenged some of my permaculture students a few years ago to build one of these. I said, you can build it for under $50. They built it for $38. And I said, you could probably sell it for $150, $200 because, and there's a way you can take that same thing and hang it inside a casement window facing south, and that'll heat your house. So you can use just common sense and come up with it. We did put on some solar thermal units, and this is our hot water heating system. If you only have a little bit of money, and because a lot of the photovoltaic systems and the solar systems are very expensive, this is probably the best return on your money. Now, as it turned out, when we put this in several years ago, it cost about $6,700. Because of the tax breaks federally and statewide, this was half price. In other words, we wrote off half of that cost. And so now is the time to do it. If you've got the money, now is the time to put it in. In fact, it turned out the engineer who came and put this in for me, he liked the neighborhood, so he bought the house behind me, and he put a system in there. And he's got a way. He has 3 of these that he's going to pump it and use the solar heated hot water between the joists in his hardwood floor, and he's going to heat radiantly up through that hardwood floor. He's putting down some of those thermal reflectors under it, and eventually I'll do that. So basically, this is what the system is. The little white tank is the one that has essentially antifreeze coming down in it, and there's a heat exchange inside that goes to that big tank. That big tank then goes into my hot water heating tank that was there when I had to change the hot water heater earlier. The best system, and hopefully when we get Sean Fitzpatrick in here later, we'll see his system. Use some sort of thermal hot water heating system and run it through an on-demand heater. So only when you turn on the hot water and you start to run the water through, it clicks and fires, and so you only heat the water as you need it. And again, when I was looking at those, when I put in my hot water heater about 5-6 years ago, before we got into this system, they didn't have the tax breaks. Now they have the tax breaks on those as well.
So your regular hot water heater supplements the solar?
Right, if I need it. And you can see behind, that's a big 80-gallon tank. My 40-gallon tank is behind it, which is gas hot water heat. The engineer that lives behind me says basically he's got an electric system, and he basically flips his off at about May. Doesn't even use it. He just got married. He said, sometimes I can feel it after a few rainy days. I said, you're going to have to flip that sucker on. You get 2 people in that house now. It's coming. Here's the biggest savings. Now, Mollison, when he wrote this book, the design manual in the early 80s, he went around and he analyzed what common utility took the same amount of energy on a yearly basis as all the energy produced by all the nuclear power plants in the U.S. Drying your clothes. And so it's interesting, you go to some of these homeowners associations, these setups, and you can't you can't put stuff out on a line. It's illegal. They say, no, you can't. And what it is they didn't want underwear out on the line. I mean, that's the main thing. It's going to mess with my property value. Well, I got news for you. If you have it in the next few years coming, it's going to raise your property value. Because just think about this. If we all dried our clothes on the line, we could have turned off the nuclear power plants. Well, now we're going to be running our cars from the nuclear power plants, so we're not going to be turning them off. Probably we're going to be building them. One of the things that my wife and I try to do is we try to buy only Energy Star systems. The washer, and when we were in Switzerland 10 years ago, visiting some friends, this is on the Around the World, he came, is it true you can still buy top-load washer machines in your country? Well, you can still buy them, you know, and they're very inefficient and not good. And you know, the washing machine on the left, these are a Westinghouse brand. Basically, it runs on about $9 worth of energy a year. So it's an incredible system. So this is our backyard when we got there. We had one wild cherry tree, and in the very upper right-hand corner you can see the leaves from the one plum we had. And so we had that little shed. The garage to the right was the neighbor's, so we looked around, and even though this image doesn't show it, where we have that mulched patch of garden, that was one of the sunniest places in the yard. It had to get beyond the big tree that has since been taken down. So basically what I did, and I'm going to show you how to do the lasagna garden when Preston and I are each doing lectures on starting a garden. And basically I layered in one paper and cardboard. I put in a lot of horse manure. I came on top of that with straw. I came on top of that with mulch. And you can just keep going up. It's called a lasagna garden, and Toby Hemingway talks about that in his soils portion of your text. It's the way to go. It's what I'm doing in my garden. It just hasn't gotten there yet. The soil is terrible. I'm embarrassed. So anyway, one of the things that I had, my wife, and this was when we were living in our other place, had given me a wood-burning hot tub for my 50th birthday. And I installed it in the front yard, and it was great. We heated up, jumped in, I had parties, and everyone would be, it was wonderful. Except it was in a place where I could only water maybe from where I am to the wall, maybe 100 square feet. So when we moved to this place, I said, I'm going to put that hot tub someplace where I can water if I just have to use siphoning and gravity. And so I put it uphill a little bit, and you can see the garden is downhill to the right. And so I built some bamboo and enclosed it and had it all set up, and it really was a nice setup. The other thing to see in this first image, if you look at the background, you see those 4x4s standing up in the air? My wife said, I want a chicken coop. I said, great, I'd love to have eggs. So she went out and built the place that housed them. And then she said, yeah, so I need to put an enclosure around the chickens, because the one thing about chickens is they need to be secure, because there's a lot of predators that come after them. And so she went out and got some 4x4. No, Gina, wait. Now, this is before they had that law change that said you cannot pressure treat the wood with that arsenic. And so I said, no, please take those back. So she took them back, and I went out and I bought some cedar logs, and then I had been told that the way the Native Americans prior to all of our high technology did it to protect their wood from being damaged is they'd char it. And when it's charred, basically it's neutral, so there's nothing there for the microbes or insects to eat. And so my wife was out digging in the backyard, and she found this brick walk. So she said, great. It was just under the grass. So she took it up and said, okay, let's use the bricks to go down beside the garden. You see it to the right. And I said, you know what? While we've got that soil there, let's char our cedar logs, and we'll use those and build with those. So she and one of the students that worked with us then went out, and they propped logs up, and they built a fire and charred it. And so we took that, and you can see in the center post, you see the char on the bottom of that? And so I just built this enclosure for our chickens. And it worked like a charm, and I built this with a belt sander. I've since learned better tools to use, but it worked out, and you'll see it. Now, the interesting thing about this chicken coop, chickens need shade. They can handle the cold pretty well, but because they just huddle together, and they come out even stupider in the morning when they're all cold and everything. But they can't handle the sun. So what we need is shade. So what I did is we planted muscadine and scuppernongs around the chicken coop, and so the grapes grow up around it and they shade it. So now the chickens have the shade. Well, I didn't know this when I did it. Turns out grapes are the plants that the Japanese beetles go to. It's an attractor plant. So it's one of the first plants. They go to that, and they go to the prunus, in other words, your plums or your cherries. So when we go down in the morning when the Japanese beetles are in season, that's early June, we go down and we take and we lean against and we shake it. And what a Japanese beetle does, and this is understanding your systems. This is what you have to do. You have to be observant. A Japanese beetle, when it is frightened or attacked or threatened, it just drops. So basically, they drop down into the chicken coop. Guess what? Chickens love Japanese beetles. They do. And so it's a Japanese beetle trap. And chickens are good for lots of things. We're always throwing our greens. Chickens need greens. And chickens, they devastate a landscape. They'll go in, they'll eat everything. And so, in fact, the design I did for some friends out in Orange County, I set it up so they had some rotating areas where they'd grow grass so that they'd have greens they could let the chickens in on a rotating basis. Well, we take a little time and we put in red clover in the winter just to keep stuff going. If you've got plants growing, you're putting food down for the microbes. You're keeping the microbes happy. Most plants will drop at least half, sometimes as much as 80% of the sugars that they make down into the soil, as opposed into the fruits and the leaves. Are dropping it into the soil because there's an action in the soil food web where these plants come in and they eat that, and then other things come in and eat those little microbes, and it turns it into nitrogen, which the plant then needs to take up to survive. So basically, we're growing greens all winter long, and we'll just go harvest them, throw them in the chicken coop because they want that. We also have the chickens there because they will, and I learned this from Harvey Harmon, and I talked about it in the principle last week. If you put them together and you put peach trees in the chicken coop, because then the peach borers can't get to the peach tree. And when we chose our chickens, and you can choose how you want, we chose Easter every morning. And that is, we want colored eggs every single morning. So we got the Araucanas and the Australopes and those sorts of things that laid the colored eggs. And it's still a lot of fun. If you look at this image to the left is the image of the egg from our chickens. To the right is one of the organic eggs. I mean, it's organic, but it still doesn't have the power and the punch in it that the other one has. And one of my colleagues in the department says this is a result of eating greens. And I'm not sure, because they don't eat as many greens in the winter, and they're still really dark. On occasion, we need to supplement the girls, and that is, we need to bring in some new chickens. We don't eat any of the chickens that we name. And so they're all named, so we don't eat any of them. And so, they get old, they stop laying as many eggs. So what we do is we'll get some fertile eggs and take a magic marker and mark them and set them underneath in the laying boxes, because the chickens are just laying eggs there all the time. And so we leave those and let the chickens raise them. The thing we found this last time we raised a couple chicks is that when they're raised by a mother, they become almost feral. So They're not as easy as if you buy your chickens mail order. And we get them from Murray McMurray. And you have to get a minimum order of 25 chicks. So we got a bunch of people together say, "Want chickens?" Yeah. So we had 25 because we ordered them. They came into our place, and at the time we did it, Eli was younger, and there were a bunch of kids running. "Come on over and handle the chickens, because then they're socialized and they'll get along with people better." So we gave Eli and his bud a chicken each, and so they basically said, "This is my chicken," and ran around raising that chicken. It was really, and they were easy to get along with. We loved them.
You buy sexed chicks?
They come as day-old chicks.
Okay.
And typically they say they're only hens, and they're about 95% right on that. And the other thing about it, I mean, we're all hens now, and we've gotten a couple roosters. And my wife, talking to people at the farmer's market, ran into a woman who would take the rooster. And she has 300 acres and just lets them go. So we've taken roosters there. What's that?
We do that as well. We had a number of people bringing us roosters.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good place. Right behind you is a place to take those roosters.
We just introduce them. If you introduce them at night, they'll be all right, by the morning.
The thing about it is, and the guy that ran the American Heritage breed place out in Pittsburgh, he said, "Well, Will, if there are no roosters, one of the hens will start crowing." I said, "Oh, come on." Well, in fact, we have a hen that crows every morning now, and she's a hen. She's laying some of the green eggs, so you just put up with it. My wife and I decided on our trip around the world, as I said last week, I think, that we were going to put our money where our interest was. So we put our money into soil that we could bring in to start it and pump it and get it going. And basically, as I said last week, we grow greens year-round. In fact, we're going to be putting in right now, and you've probably got them in, the greens for the coming season. So by the end of September, we should start having salads every day. And, it's just fun to put them in different ornamental ways. This is some of the production we get when we're really cranking. And, in fact, if you look on YouTube, there are a couple of videos there. One is called Keeping Up with the Harvest. And these were shot in my backyard, so it goes through what it means. One of the things, Gina and I are pretty good at growing. We're not so good at harvesting. Now that sounds weird, doesn't it? Is that the thing?
I got that.
Because harvesting's a lot of work. Oh my goodness, yeah, look at this. Oh, I love this shot. And I love the fact they both have on red shirts. And in the background, you see the white color of that fall blooming clematis, so that's just about this time of the year. Some of the peaches we had a couple years ago, these are the cherries, the first harvest of cherries I got last year. Had some wonderful pies off that, some of our plums. The figs, I have not gotten many figs at all this year, and I suspect that kind of like the Bullock brothers, we've been discovered by our brothers and sisters in the animal kingdom, and they are taking us down. But these were mulberries from a mulberry tree behind, and I tried this year. I tried to dry the mulberries because I heard the mulberries don't quite have enough sugar. So if you dry them down, you concentrate the sugar. Well, I dried them too much, and they turned into little gravel things, so it didn't quite work. This is something I'm pushing, and in fact, I've got to do the last harvest on this. I should have done it yesterday. These are elderberries, and I love the word elderberry. That means it's the wisest berry of all, right? And so the gig with elderberries is, and I learned this from a guy hopefully we'll meet this semester, an elderberry is a viral blocker. And that is, if you get a virus that goes in, then if you have the elderberry in your system, and I take a teaspoon every morning, then it prevents the virus from going through your cell wall into your cells. The virus we're concerned about now is H1N1. So go out and buy out Whole Foods and get their elderberry syrup. And put in an elderberry plant because they're real easy to grow. They need a little bit of moisture, so they're kind of an edge plant. And you have to cut them back almost to the ground each year, and they'll grow in 1 year's growth about 15 feet. Well, it's hard to harvest them at 15 feet. If you wait 2 years, they break. So it's a good one. The other one that's interesting that we put in was the passion flower. Primitive plant. I mean, it looks like it belongs to the era of the dinosaurs, doesn't it? And and so we put it up, and it turned into a screen on our back porch. And 1 year, we've got it on the back side of the house, north side, so we're not getting. It's called the maypop, and it's a wild native that grows here in North Carolina. This is a little fruit we got 1 year. And you bite into the inside of it. It's kind of red and juicy, not as sweet. My wife was excited about it because when she was in the Peace Corps in Africa, they had a really, really sweet maypop over there. It's still beautiful, and I'll talk about it in a bit. The one thing I tried 1 year, and I like texture in my garden. The thing about edibles is it takes a lot of leaf area to get enough sun in to make those big, complex carbohydrates and sugars. And so most of the leaves of everything you grow are about that big. They're pretty big, they're pretty good texture, but they're all the same size. And so when I look at it, I said, yeah, come on, I want a little variety here. I'm a designer. I want to make this thing juicy. And so I wanted bananas. And I said, give me some bananas, give me some, so we did these big textured jungle-y plants. And it turned out we put the banana, if you know the banana, it needs really long daylight. But what a banana is it needs a lot of water and it needs a lot of nitrogen. So it needs a lot of food. Well, we put the banana down in the chicken coop, got a lot of nitrogen there. I happened to stick it, didn't plan on this, just where all 4 yards beside us flowed in a swale. So it was getting all the water it needed and all the nitrogen. And at that time, I was saying, oh, well, I'll do what you do with the banana. You dig it up. So I dig it up, take all the soil off, wash it off, wrap it in newspaper, and stick it in the crawl space under the house so it would overwinter. Pick that thing. Well, this thing got to be a 100-pound root. And I said, I'm not moving this again. It's going to survive or not. And it grew bananas. Well, they weren't edible. We didn't have enough daylight. But, I was really proud of the fact we could get a bunch out of it. What do you do once you have what you have? You have to preserve it. So we've done lots of different things. A lot of what we do is we'll just freeze it, and we don't have a big freezer because that's energy intensive. This is just, a little one of those compact freezers just in the side, and it's enough for us to put up enough fruit that we can go through the winter with it. The other thing we did is we purchased one of those dryers, electronic dryer. And so we will put our different fruits and different herbs and stuff through that. This is the figs, the 1 year I had. I talked to some of my friends, and most of you understand this. You have grandparents or great-grandparents. They have knowledge that you need, we all need. And so I was talking, my mentor is about 91 years old. And so I was out talking with he and his wife a couple weeks ago. And I said, well, I want to somehow figure out a solar dryer here in North Carolina where we have such high humidity it doesn't work well. They said, well, I don't know if that's so. We just took some old pieces of tin from the roof and set it out in the yard, and that's how we dried all our peaches. So I've got some old pieces of tin left over, and they're blue. So they're good and dark, and they'll take in a lot of sun. And so I'm going to dry, even if I have to finish them with this electronic, I'll start them by just drying them in the sun. I'll do that. So that's one of the things. Hopefully I'm going to do it maybe between now and when you come, and hopefully I'll have that up so you can take a look at it. We made some jellies. You experienced this last year, and in fact, there's another video that they made at my house. It's called Heavenly Peach Preserves. And that's, my wife did that one. So you look on YouTube if you want to see that one. When I talked about my passions this year, I talked about pyrotechnical stuff. My other passion is making the perfect peach pie. And in fact, what I had to do is I had to make this for my studio. They said, come on, we'll get with it. We just would pick our herbs and just stick them up in our attic. Our attic is still, it gets hot in the summertime. We've got one of those attic fans on a thermostat, and it's a good place for drying. One of the things we love to make, and I know many of you make this as well, is pesto. We grow a lot of basil. And often we will go buy some of those imported pine nuts, but sometimes we'll use the pecans that come from around here and put that in with it. My wife likes to make several different brands of the pesto. I like the one that's the Thai basil, which is a little bit hotter and a little bit spicier, and it's a really good one. So we use a lot of that. The other thing that we have to preserve, and we're all going through this, and this is my son, and a couple of years ago in grade school, they were experimenting with growing pumpkins. And so he started the pumpkins, put the seeds in, started them, and then brought them home and said, okay, let's put it. And one of the things we're preserving here is the knowledge of how to grow food, because a lot of us have forgotten that. And so, you can tell by that look on his face, he's proud of those pumpkins. So, another thing that I did is I wanted to grow some shiitake mushrooms, and like I say, we'll take that on. So, and basically here it's interesting. This is on the north side of my house. Now, when you're storing your shiitakes around, they have to be in the shade. If they're in the shade with moisture, that's best case. One of the best setups I saw was up in the mountains by this little stream running through, and they had a bunch of broadleaf evergreens, and they just strung the shiitakes along the side of the creek. They had moisture all the time. They had more production than they could handle. And he used to take it to the farmer's market all the time. So it was going. Well, I put it here, and there's too much sun. So I said, phew, I have to build a shade structure. So I just took some bamboo and some old burlap and threw it together, and it worked because, and what I had to do is I took the mushrooms. We had that wood-burning hot tub, and typically when we use it, we don't put any chemicals or anything in it. We just heat it up. And if we're going to use it a couple nights in a row, we won't use it more than a week if it's just the family, because after that, the body oils and stuff, it starts to get ripe. If I throw a party and I have 300 people over there, it's ripe the next day, because there's lots of body oil. Well, okay, here's this source, and remember the principle. Use it at the highest level, and we talk next highest. And so, what I do is stick my shiitake mushroom logs in the hot tub, let them set for 2 or 3 days, pick them out, and then I would water them, and I would get this kind of production. And then what I do is I take the water in the hot tub and use that to irrigate the garden. So it's using it at the many levels. This is the remember in the niche in the geology lecture, the ecology lecture, the niche between the hedge to our east or west, and then the hot tub, and then over top of it is the wild cherry, and that's the only shade spot we have that's shady all year. So I just built a rack and just lean the mushroom logs against that and water it when I can. One of the things a couple of years ago, I was just kind of sick of the texture that we had going, and I said, well, we need to grow it up the walls. Again, the vertical dimension is a place you can use, especially in a tight urban context. Grow it up the walls so that you can increase the area you're using. If you look over to the left where you see that gazing ball, that's a bean teepee, so I'm growing it up the bean teepee. And when my son grew these pumpkins, we grew them on a fence. And in fact, what we do now, what I do is if we have to buy onions or something, those bags you get an onion in, we don't throw them away, we keep them. And then we take those out and we'll put them around a pumpkin or a melon on a fence to hold it, because otherwise it'll pick itself. So you're reusing that stuff. And this is just, I think in this particular case, we didn't have those bags. I hadn't started to save them, and I was using some bird netting. But it worked fine. But you look here, and you can see the bean teepee that has the gazing ball on top, and then the blue box. what I was trying to do in the blue box is I've been told that you can, if you grow potatoes, and if you look in Mollison's introduction to Permaculture book, he talks about growing potatoes in a 55-gallon drum. And you put a little soil in the bottom, put the potato in, and as the potato grows, you add soil. And basically where you get the joint of the leaf branch coming out, once you add soil on top of that, you get the greenery up, you fake the potato into thinking it should be producing potatoes at those joints. So basically, you should be able to grow about 250 pounds of potatoes in a 55-gallon drum. And so I said, okay, that's great. So I'll build these racks, and I'll keep stacking them, and I did that, and then I put some in the side, and I tried all of these, and I said, oh, okay, let me go. How many potatoes do I get? Well, I went to harvest them. And I said, I'm not doing this right. And so I'm just going to go on a low-carb diet. I'm just getting out of it because I had too much. So, and my wife is the head gardener, as I said. And so she said, well, if you're not going to use those boxes, I am. So she took them and put them down beside the house and did a raised bed there and, you know, grew greens and all the brassicas and stuff like that. And really, it came on big time. In that same area last year, Gina and I, neither Gina nor I like asparagus. I think our mothers were both really bad cooks. And so and it was one of those things where I just couldn't eat it. My son loves asparagus. Oh, poor Eli. Well, what we said, okay, Eli, we will make you an asparagus bed. So we did. So this is down there. This is the second year. Typically, when you make an asparagus bed, you don't harvest from it for about 3 years. And, of course, the only way I can eat asparagus is if you snap it off in the garden and eat it right then. Now, and talk about no embodied energy. That's it, man. It's right there. It's too wonderful. And that's the only way I can eat it. If you look at the large textured plant around the outside, that's the castor bean. And we had put it in because I wanted some texture, as I said, to the leaves. Be wary of putting the castor bean plant in. Eli was a deliberate child. He was careful because both of his parents are a little bit older. If you have a wild child, do not put the castor bean in because they're deadly poisonous if you eat that bean. You'll see one, and I kind of control. We left them because we were going to have a garden tour last year. I said, I just want a forest of castor beans here. So we left them up. But I've got one that somehow it volunteered right next to our back porch in a gravel bed, and I really like it there. So I'm even going to let that one bloom and drop and see if I can't get a forest right out in the back. Here's the thing where I tried the Three Sisters. The Three Sisters is a guild. I think most of us know this, corn, beans, and squash. And what I did here is I planted them all together. Wrong. You don't do that. You put in the corn, let it get up about 2 weeks. Then you put in the beans, let them get up about 2 weeks. And what the beans do is the beans set nitrogen, so they're feeding the corn. Corn's a high nitrogen user. Remember talking about the Pilgrims putting fish down in the holes the way the Native Americans taught them? And so the beans are feeding the corn and growing up the corn. That's the trellis. And then when you come in with the squash, what it does is it keeps the ground cool around there. So that's its job. And obviously, what is corn, beans, and squash? Succotash, right. That's why succotash came along, because they came together. They all kind of, you harvest everything and go for it. So it made some sense. Now, interestingly, this particular box, and I saw this, the neighbor to our right has the neighborhood fire pit. And so we were over there one night. He was having a fire, and everyone was around. And the neighbor on the other side of him came in carrying these oak boards. And he's just throw them on. I said, what are you doing? These oak boards, they cut down a tree in the neighborhood. And in fact, it was a tree in the yard that my wife and I bought right next door to us. They had it saw it up into lumber, and because it didn't quite cure correctly, they were bending a little bit, he was just going to burn it. I said, no, wait a minute, I'll take it. So I took them and I did that thing where you cut the slots in the wood and you slide one into the other, and so I was just making a box. Oak is really good. It's very resistant to rot. So don't be afraid to use oak. It's not as good as cedar. It's certainly not as good as black walnut and some of those, and black locust is one of the best in the state. I mean, I have a friend in the mountains. His house is built on black locust posts because they know they last at least 40 years in the ground, and it could be much longer than that. So, you can find the material that you want to use for that. So this is the neighbor. They had a couple trees between their house and what is now our side yard, and they started to drop limbs through the roof. And they had a daughter that was in one of these two in a bedroom under there, and they said, no, we're not having limbs coming through the house into the daughter's room. So they cut the trees down, hired a guy to come and cut them up, and he had one of those band saws, and he cut all the wood up, and he just ricked it up. That means he put spacers between all the wood, covered it on top so you keep the water off, and let it cure for a year, and you've got wood that you can use. And basically he built a screen porch with it. So, I've read this, I don't know this, but in Germany, typically they have urban forestry programs where 60% of their small municipal budgets come from the urban forestry products, whether it's lumber or food or whatever. And so I think this is something we're going to evolve as a culture in this nation, and we're going to turn to some of these productive methodologies inside our city limits. The other interesting thing is when they took the tree down, and this is the mushroom I was telling you about, Preston, I don't know what that is. Do you?
No, I didn't want to tell you.
Grant, Kingdom of Fungi. Who is? You are.
Yeah.
Anna. So this is growing up off that dead root. And I'd go out, I'd see it, and I wouldn't see it because I was mowing the neighbor's lawn before she moved into a retirement home. And I'd see it, and I always catch it too late. It was like leather when I got to it, but I kept cutting it. So basically, there's a cedar tree behind my home, and behind the lot I live on, and what I would do is I'd go up and I'd harvest the limbs as I needed them, and after I got kind of beyond what I could see was the length of my ladder, I started to leave a limb about that much. So I basically built a ladder on the tree so I could climb up it, and then I got one of my students who's a certified arborist to come in, and he cleaned the tree for me. So now I can't get up any higher. I have to hire him, and that's fine. So anyway, I would take these cedar branches, and I would cut it up and make gates out of it, and put in some welded wire in it, and you can see I've got some window sashes that are the counterweight that closes it. And I got into having some fun and making some fun-looking gates. And basically, you can see here I've used glass jugs filled with colored water. Again, I'm doing blue here. And basically what happens is I have, if you can see it, it's attached here, and then it runs through a pulley here so that when you push the gate open, it lifts this, and then it just, the counterweight closes the gate. So I've got the jug of water, and I had to force my son to drink cider so I could get some cider jugs because I wanted that gallon of glass. I didn't want plastic out there. It just doesn't feel right. And so it just was beautiful, and I loved it. And in fact, I put one on the gate that goes into the chicken coop. And then a couple years ago, I said, you know what? It's going to freeze. That's not good. So I went out one morning, and I said, great. It hasn't frozen. I'll go get some antifreeze, and I'll get this thing. I came back that night and went, whoosh. I was late. But isn't that beautiful? So then I went out and I got the antifreeze, and if you put antifreeze, it's this bright, terrible green. That's not the blue color I want. So I put it in because I had it, and then I had to get that neon blue food dye to put in to make it work. And And you can see here, it's interesting, the gate going from behind the garage now, some of it worked, some of it didn't. It's interesting, it was green, and then it froze. I mean, the temperature got down below freezing, and the color of the antifreeze went to clear. And I didn't understand it. What the heck's going on here? But then the dye would take, so I could add the blue dye. One of the things that happened when we went around the world, we had to, you always have to buy stuff for friends and relatives. So we said, where are we going to do this? And I'm going to try to hurry. I'm going to be late again. Please hang with me. I'll go real quick. And so I said, let's do it in Bali. Fairly inexpensive there. I was working for this woman, helping her with some of the stuff she was doing, and so my wife went out and ran around Bali and bought all this stuff, and we put it all in one big crate and shipped it home. So we got it home, and then we could distribute it, and she had that shipping crate, and of course, being a pyro, I said, ooh, that'll make a great fire. She said, no, it won't. It's going to make a playhouse for our son. I said, okay. So I said, oh, goodness, we're going to have more trash in our yard. She said, you just wait. So she built this thing, and I looked at it, and I said, my goodness, that's beautiful. I said, you need to put a roof on that. She said, no, Mr. Permaculture, you need to put a roof on that. So I set myself the task of making a roof without spending any money, just using leftover things in the yard. So I took leftover lumber, leftover landscape cloth, some gravel, some turf. I stuck in a little bit of turf and stuck in Black-Eyed Susan, and it really turned into something that was fun. And then every now and then, the grass would grow high and it needed to be cut, so I'd lift my son up there, give him a pair of scissors, said, mow the lawn. And he only had to do that once a season, and he got into it. A lot of times when you're putting your garden together, put together medicinals. Now, the echinacea, the one in front, the purple coneflower, is a good immune booster. So we put it everywhere. You can take the flowers, you can take the leaves, you can take the roots, which is what we did, and tincture it. Tincture means you put it in a jug. I put in 100 proof vodka, let it set for 6 months, take out the roots, and then I'll take 2 or 3 drops of that whenever I'm starting to feel a little bit iffy. And it's a really good immune booster to prevent colds in the winter. The other good one, and you'll see this when you come to my place, I've left the stalks so you can see what they look like, the mullein. This grows along the roadside. Native Americans used to take the leaf and smoke it because it would help their lungs. So if you know any smokers, this is what they need. And my wife gets a little bit of bronchitis every year. And so what we do is we take the blooms, and they bloom every morning. So we take the fresh blooms every morning, drop it in a little jar, and put the 100 proof vodka on top of that, and let it set again for 6 months. And then she'll take a couple drops of it if she feels her bronchitis coming on. The other thing I discovered is that the passion flower, the leaves of the passion flower, if you make it into a tea, it's a relaxant. And so my son's a little anxious. I said, try this. My daughter was having some trouble sleeping. I dried some of these leaves, gave it to her, said, try this, see if this will work. So basically, these are the plants. Go back and look at this if you want to on the website. I'm not going to leave them up, but this is essentially what we have in our yard now. It's a start. Probably, and what we might have is 100, 120, 130 different types of cultivars. Will go way beyond that. Let me look at the water system. I wanted to get into the collection, and again, I was doing it without a lot of money, without the ability to put a lot of money and resources into it. More than some, but less than others. So I got this fairly inexpensive 300-gallon water tank. I got it from Agri Supply. It's translucent. If you do get one of these, and when I bought this, it was about $170. The same thing costs maybe $270 now. Typically, if you're going to capture water in tanks, you can plan on spending about $1 a gallon. Okay, but if you get one of these, you're going to have to paint it so you don't let sunlight through. The sunlight will come into it and will cause an algae bloom. So I drop some, if you have a calcium rock down in the bottom, that grabs the heavy metals. So I took some old concrete blocks, dropped them down in the bottom of the tank. I set a cone on top so that when I drop the water out of the gutters, if there's any trash in it, it would go off. I built a concrete block base for it in the front. I wanted to get it up as high as I could. This is my son helping me. This is the thing, you can see the water through it. It's translucent. So I painted it, left a strip in the middle so I could see how much is in it. This is the one I saw that kind of got me excited about it. This is in Melbourne again at the Ceres Park. The thing about water, and if you're catching it in a system, and I know, Kurt, you have this at your place, the tanks you capture it in are huge. So they're bemis in the landscape. And so part of our task is to say, well, how am I going to make that fit into the landscape? And there are different ways to do it. You can grow vines around it, etc. What we were doing on this tank, and in fact, I've got to go, I was supposed to prune this weekend. We put in Carolina jessamine. It's too aggressive. It's growing into the house. It's covering the tank really well, but it's way too aggressive, so we've got to get rid of that. So, you know, I got a clue because this was what we had down back, and I was capturing the water off the roof of the chicken coop into a small tank to feed the chickens. And then for Father's Day several years ago, my daughter said, well, let me paint the chicken coop for you. She's the scenic painter, right? So I said, okay. And so she painted it, and she's got hen's rock and, you know, all this stuff. Chick's rock, I think, is in the upper right-hand corner. But it's all green. And I said, you know, I like that green. So I took that green and painted the tank, and it's not had an algae problem. And so I took the other tank that was down back, painted it, and then came back on top of that with white paint, so that I have the white that goes into the color of the house. And then the other thing I did, and I'm going to show you this when you come to the house. If you look at the, this is PVC. If you look at the PVC pipe, it comes down here, and it comes out, and it's got some sort of a valve. In this particular case, it just unscrews. So when it rains, it comes down here, and it fills this up. And when the water gets up there, it drops in. And you see the cone there? It drops into the tank. Basically, that's what's known as a first flush diverter. And what happens is the air quality in a city situation, there's a lot of nasties wandering around in the air. And when you don't have rain for a long time, they're on your roof. And when you rain, if you take that and put it into a tank like this, and as I said last week, this is both for irrigation and for backup water supply. So we take the nasties here, run it out, then this drops in, and we've got a cleaner water supply going into our tank. Speaking of water, my wife wanted to put a pond in. I wanted to build a small bamboo hut right here because I wanted to download stuff, like if we need some mulch or if we need some rocks, or I need a place to put that in the garden. So I said, let's build. And she said, no, I want a garden. She won. So, I mean, she wanted a pond. I said, okay, do a pond. And so I told her how I would build it, and I said, go ahead. And so she dug the hole and did all this stuff and went and got rock, and then said, boy, that takes a lot of rock. Went back and got a lot more rock, you know, and put it in. I said, Gina, and you can see the soil to the right. I said, frogs need some muck to get down in the wintertime, and you've got a liner. She said, no, I want it clean. I want to be able to see. And I did one of those awful things that sometimes husbands or wives do to one. I said, why don't you go in and get a drink of water? She went in to get a drink of water, and I took the shovel and threw about 6 or 8 shovels full of dirt in the bottom. Well, she can't get it out now, right? There's water. And of course, it settled and got clean. It was fine, and I knew that. I did. Mollison says put 15% of your landscape into water. He lives in a desert. Australia is one of the driest climates ever. I don't know if 15% is right. I know you need some amount. We have right now in our landscape 4 ponds. Now that's 4 small ponds. This thing is maybe 6 feet long at its longest. But, you know, more water increases the biodiversity. So I encourage you very strongly to do that. And this is the pond where we went and got 2 pollywogs, and they turned into 4 full-size frogs the next day. And it turned into this wonderful thing. The frogs were there. And Eli, when he was younger, we gave him these little nets, and he'd go around and catch the frogs. And he'd catch every frog in the pond 2 or 3 times a day. They became tame, and I even like this photo. If you see that little net with a blue handle, it's kind of this. My wife made a grapevine arbor for him to set under, and planted the morning glories over it. But if you look at that rock, there's a frog sitting in the middle of the net waiting for Eli to come out and play. You know, so it's like, we really like this. And so there's all kinds of frogs. This is on the front of the book, of course, the 2 female frogs choreographing the 5 males. So lots of stuff goes on around here, and it really does increase radically the biodiversity. This is the pond that we have. It's called the Barrel Pond down by our shed. What happened in the built environment is that because of the pond, critters came in from all over. And because of the critters, kids came in from the whole neighborhood. And because the kids came in, the parents came in. So this became the neighborhood hangout here. And it was just a funky place for us. You know, we had some old chairs, old tables, and a lawn. It turned into a mud pit. So I said, you know what? This doesn't work. We have to do something. So we took and made an effort to make a small patio there. We put stone and brick together, and one of my grad students made one of those concrete pavers in a spiral again. And so this is what it looked like when we were finished with it. To our consternation, we had dug the roots, and we killed the plum tree by it. But that particular plum only really gave us a good harvest once every 10 years or so. So we've taken some others. So this is what it looked like when we had that whole thing going. And we didn't have trees. I don't like big trees because I want sun to produce stuff. It's hot. So I said, you know what? I'm going to try to build a low something, a gazebo. So I built the gazebo here out of bamboo, and we've tried different iterations of this in front of Kilgore Hall now. Here's the fall blooming clematis at this year going over top of it. And you can see in the background that banana that when it was such a good year. Well, I rebuilt the gazebo 2 or 3 times, which I like to build with bamboo, but I said, you know, I don't want to do this every 2 or 3 years. I want a permanent one here. So I went locally, again, bought from the Sawyer, who's just south of Jordan Lake. I bought some cedar logs, got some students of mine to help me, put them in, put up a perimeter beam, and this is the same principle as a yurt, which is a tension compression ring. That is, you can see at the very middle of it, there's a keystone of cedar, and all of the cedar logs or the rafters lean into it. If weight comes on that, the tendency is to push the poles out. So you can see I've got cable running around holding it together. These were the yurts on the Gobi Desert, where they'd have a ring at the top, and they'd put the poles in. Then they'd put all kinds of hides over it, and they'd take a rope and go around the perimeter beam and tie it together. So they could take that whole thing apart, stack it on their small ponies, and ride around the countryside and drag their houses behind them.
It must be really hard to get the keystone just right.
Yeah. It was. What they had to do, and I had 2 students do it, 2 good builders. I'm in a really good position. I know who can do what in the horticulture, in the design build department. And so they had to set it up on the side and build it when it was down on the ground. And then once they had it built, they put it back up and put them on as they went along. Did a good job, very good job. Basically, we grow, and you can see some of the moonflowers going here. The other side of it, one group of students wanted to do a cob oven, and so we did a design for the cob oven. I said, I want a chicken head if we're going to do this. So they found the materials, and we built it and put it together. Cob is sand, straw, and clay. And, of course, I wanted glass eyes, so we kind of put it together and got some tile. And this was the finished product. And it's great. But it's not finished because for the longest time, and this is 2 years now, it's just kind of one more task, I had to put tarps over it because I didn't have a covering. Cob, here's the thing with cob, and they make houses out of them. The longest inhabited house in the world is made of cob. It's over 1,000 years old. It's down in the southwest of this country. It's adobe, essentially. And so, I'd throw a tarp over it. Well, a tarp is great. It keeps the rain off, but it traps the moisture. So the clay, and it got wet and things started to fall off. And so finally, I built a roof over it, and again, I used the blue roof. Now you can see the blue roof on the garage that I couldn't get tax credit for. So I've got this oven, and now I've got to come back, repair the tile damage, and get the door built so I can start cooking pizzas in that oven. Just materials. I'll tell this story. Every Christmas, I used to buy a bottle of Harvey's Bristol Cream Sherry, which is a sweet sherry. And I loved the bottle, and I didn't even know what I was going to do with it, so I started saving it. And then I saw what I could do with it. Some of my friends did this, and so it's a garden edge, And so I had to come up with some more Harvey's Bristol Cream bottles. Some of the play, and I'm going to go quickly through this. When my son was long and lanky, I didn't have trees to climb. That's how you get muscles in your upper body. You climb trees. So I built him a bamboo climber. I used old tires from the bicycle shop because when you stretch them and tie them, they snap back and they make it really tight. And so he and his buddies were climbing all over that, and he got good enough at that and strong enough that I could put a zip line up, and so he and his buddies would zip line down the back. Some of the things we put in this case, the fennel in the front yard, it's an attractor for some of the butterflies. And, of course, again, this is a learning curve for some, but you can see what they do. We had some parsley out in the back under the gazebo a bit ago, and I went out one morning and it was gone. Well, the swallowtails got it, so that's fine, and we want that. We want that in our yard. That's increasing the biodiversity, increasing what's in there. Let me show you this, and we're going to be, I think I can get through. This was our neighbor's house. Feisty woman. And the only person in the neighborhood that could put up with her was my wife. I mean, she was something. And so, I liked her energy. She was kind of grumpy and, always wanted to pick a fight with people. But at least she had energy. And so no one could really get along with her very easily in the neighborhood, and she didn't have any family. She had outlived them all. So she basically left the house to my wife in her will, which is, that's nice. But then she had to go into a home. So, they had to sell it because that's all she had. She was a ward of the state. So my wife and I said, should we buy it? Well, it's right next door. And we said, no, we need to buy it. We need to have that land. So I said, well, we'll fix it up. We'll make it into intern housing. Maybe we can get a student in here who will work on our landscape for some off rent, etc. And so we went and had it appraised. And apparently the woman that lived there for about 45 years hadn't cleaned once. Oh, my goodness. It was such a mess. When you opened the door, the whole neighborhood would kind of, close the door. So the price tag to fix it up was way, way too high. So basically we said, okay, we priced it out. Well, let's take it down. We'll just make it a lot. And so one of my former students in here, in fact, is now the deconstruction manager for Habitat. Habitat for Humanity, when they take houses down, they will recycle 70% of what they take down. And so we said, okay, and we got a deal, and with what it cost us, what we could get in a tax break for donating to Habitat, it's about the same as hiring a guy to come in with a bulldozer and haul it to the dump. So it didn't go to the dump. 50% of it went to the dump. 50% got recycled. So basically, they took the doors off, they took the roof off, then they recycled all the wood, took all the parts out. You see that chimney there? I want to show you something. This is where our vegetable garden is now. This is why the soil is so bad, because it's filled and we haven't got it to where it needs to be. So this is what it looked like when they'd filled and we'd strawed and put the grass in. This is the grass growing. And this was when I'm starting to do the lasagna garden, and I was also trying to do a hothouse or cold frame with just the bales of hay, and it worked fine. It got up to 90 degrees in there. I just took this a couple of days ago. This is the garden in it. And, you know, this is embarrassing to me because it's just not rich and vital and really jumping. But it's starting, and I'll show that to you. Let me go through this quickly, and then we'll be done. The chimney in this house, they couldn't take it anywhere, so they pushed it over. And I had been looking for a couple years for a masonry block that I wanted to make an herb spiral out of. An herb spiral is herbs built, and it takes about 60, 70 feet of herbs for cooking. Well, if you can put it down into a small spiral, you can do it in about 6 feet. So I cleaned the blocks and I put it together in the front yard, which was hot, and I finally got enough of these bricks cleaned, and I stacked it up, and I said, okay, now I've got enough. Now I can make the herb spiral. So I took the bricks away, and of course, because they're sitting there on the grass, I can see where the spiral is. So I dug the grass out, put the cardboard wet down, put the bricks back on top of that, started to build it up slowly, and this is kind of the finish. We've planted some of those. I wanted to put a pond in so that the water can, if it goes down, will go down and into that pond. And I had collected some rocks from my hometown up near Lake Ontario years ago, so I said, I want to put those in the landscape. And then because the pond needs shade, I decided to take this cut-leaf Japanese maple I gave my wife 2 decades ago that's been sitting in a pot. Let's put that in. So here we are, and I put the fairy that was by the passion flower there. So in this particular image, you can see the fairy, and there's a frog right directly below her. If you build it, they will come. And then the interesting thing that happened this past season is that we had a poppy seed that volunteered right by the Japanese maple. So it looks like the Japanese maple is blooming with a poppy. It was great. The other thing, and I'll kind of come to the conclusion with this, make sure when you're putting your garden together, and this is something I don't think Mollison does very well. Like I said, when I traveled around the world, I traveled to a minimum of 100 permaculture gardens, 250 gardens total, 100 permaculture gardens. I might have seen 5 that I would consider beautiful. Beauty is something we all need in our life. And so when you're putting together your garden, make that one of the priorities. I think it's a must. Right now, what's happening, and I'm going to end here, I'll get you out of here by 9. We're facing enormous challenges, and what can we do? We can increase food security from our garden. This tree, and you'll see this in your book. Toby Hemingway thought I lived in Asheville when he wrote his book the last time. He's changed it in the new. But this is a street tree that we planted, and we made it the Methley plum. So it's production. And the kids would ride their bicycles under it and pick plums as they went. Support your city farms and gardens. Many of you are doing CSAs. That's the way to go. That's what Haley's working on. We'll go see this garden in Greensboro in a couple weeks. This is a Montessori garden that Charlie Headington, the white-haired guy, put together. Food like at the Eco-Dorm at Warren Wilson College. And we will creatively use recycled materials. We'll go to see TS Design as well, one of the better sustainable businesses in the state. And basically, if we stay with where we're going, we'll have a very nice graveyard, or we can have paradise. And I've been here. This is Samoa. I've lived in what is considered paradise. This is the paradise I want, because this is the one that's accessible to me. I've run over by 15 minutes again. Sorry. Thank you, folks. Have a good week.